Hello everyone, I am the Desert Gardener, and today I'm up potting some pepper plants. So I thought this would be the perfect time to talk about potting soil and which is the best one to use. So I've got my tea, let's talk about that. So there are a lot of different potting soils on the market, and before we get started, you should know that there really is no such thing as potting soil. It's a soilless potting mix. Unless, of course, you're buying topsoil, which isn't what you want. That's just dirt. You want a soilless potting mix. Now, there are lots of them on the market, so how do you know which one to choose? Well, they all seem to fall into two different categories. The really cheap stuff and the really expensive stuff. So let's talk about both for a second. So the really cheap stuff like the Expert Gardener, the Vigorgo, the Miracle Grow, it's basically just forest products if you look at the ingredients. Now, forest products is just a nice way to say it's partially decomposed wood chips. And wood chips isn't really a great idea for potting your vegetables because it doesn't hold moisture very well. So you water your plants, the water's just going to run right out the bottom, and any fertilizer that you put in there is going to wash right out as well. So it's really not a good idea. Now, they do have a little bit of peat moss and perlite and some other ingredients in there, but the amount they put in each bag is so minuscule, it's just enough so they can actually write that on the label. It's basically just wood chips, so you don't want to use that by itself. Now then there's the expensive stuff like the Fox Farm, the Happy Frog, the Neptune, things like that. I think those are all made by the same company. Now these are really nice products. They have lots of peat moss, lots of perlite, lots of organic fertilizer like bat guano, worm castings, kelp, things like that. And these are really nice products. However, they're really not cost effective for doing home gardening and vegetable growing. Right here I've got a 3-gallon container, and I plant about 30 pepper plants every year. Now I probably should use a 5-gallon container, but to keep the cost down, I've been going with 3, and it seems to work for me. Now if I have 30 3-gallon containers and I fill it full of Fox Farm or Happy Frog or something like that, by the time I fill all 30, that's going to be about $500 just in potting mix alone, not counting anything else, the seeds, the grow lights, the fertilizer, or anything else you might be using. So I think that's really cost prohibitive. Most of the time, the people that really use that stuff, they're doing it for really high value stuff like cannabis and stuff like that. It's really not meant for tomatoes and peppers. It's really overkill, and you might as well just go to the farmer's market, buy it there. It's a lot cheaper. Now, if I fill these with nothing but the really cheap stuff, it's only going to be about $50. Now, that's a lot more reasonable. However, as I mentioned before, because it's basically just wood chips, it's really not a good idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use the cheap stuff, add a few things to make it worthwhile, and even lower the cost. So let's get started with that. The first thing you need to do is have 2 compost piles. Now I did a whole video on composting. I'm going to link to that below and at the end. This is essential. You need homemade compost. Now right here I have an 18-gallon tote, and I have filled it about 1/3 of the way with homemade compost. And this is totally unstrained, so there's lots of little chunks and little pieces still in there. That's perfectly fine, perfectly normal. Now the next thing you're going to do is I'm going to take some of that really cheap potting mix, and I'm going to add an equal amount of that. Now this is the Miracle Grow Performance Organics, and I'm just going to dump about the same amount in there. And as you can see, it's very dark, very black, And now it's getting a little heavy. So the next thing is we're going to add perlite. Now I've got a very large bag of perlite here. And I'm going to put, we've got about 5 to 6 gallons of material here. So I'm going to put about 5 to 6 cups of perlite. Now the next thing we want to add is some azomite. Now azomite is a lot of micronutrients. Things like boron, copper, zinc, iron, all those micronutrients that your garden soil has plenty of, but potting mix doesn't have any. So I'm just going to grab a little handful here. Now if you want to measure it out, you should do 1 tablespoon for every 2 gallons. So I'm just going to mix that in here. Doesn't have to be exact. And then we're going to stir it up. There. Now that is what potting mix should look like. It will hold the moisture, and the perlite will create little spaces for oxygen. And yes, your plant roots definitely need oxygen. And this, because the compost was free and we're only paying for the other ingredients, it actually brings the cost down to about $30 to do all 30 containers. So this 1 3-gallon container is going to be about $1 to fill. So it's actually not only better, but it's cheaper. And it just takes a little bit of work to create that compost. So now that I have one ready to go, and I filled this one up about 3/4 of the way with another batch that I did earlier off camera. And I've got a sour apple pepper plant here, and I'm just going to loosen it up a bit. Set it right down there. And fill to the soil level. There we go. It's filled to about soil level. The next thing I'm going to do is add wood chips. Now wood chips are very important because it keeps the soil cool and moist on those hot summer days. So it works really great as a cheap, inexpensive mulch. Now, once it's all in there, we're going to water with a water-soluble fertilizer. This is a liquid fish and kelp, and we're all set. Now, in a couple months, we're going to have peppers. So, if you got something out of this, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.